A warm welcome to one and all. This is Dr. Sunil Manuel, Associate Professor from the Department of Orthopedics. The topic that we'll be covering today would be regional conditions of the wrist and hand. In the last video, we did a discussion of the carpal tunnel syndrome. Today, we'll move on with a few minor topics like Dupuytren's contracture, mallet finger, trigger finger, de Quervain's tenosynovitis, and ganglion. So moving on to slide number 28, we have a condition called Dupuytren's contracture. So basically this is a proliferative fibroplasia of the subcutaneous palmar tissue, and initially it starts as nodules and cords, but later on it's a progressive condition, and later on it can go on to have irreversible flexion contractures of the joints of the fingers. So essentially the disease is a disease of the subcutaneous tissue as well as the deep palmar fascia. Slide number 29 shows the different phases of the disease. So in the first phase, basically we'll be able to palpate nodules in the palm and some small restriction of the fingers. In stage 2, we can see that there is contracture of the metacarpophalangeal joint. That's because the fibrous cord is now extending along into the fingers. And in stage 3, there is a complete contracture of the metacarpophalangeal joint, leading to occupation of the finger in the hand. So that severely restricts the general function of the hand itself. Slide number 30 shows a patient with bilateral Dupuytren's contracture. The condition typically starts with the ring finger but can go on to involve all the other fingers, and it is 10 times more frequent in men and mainly in the middle age. Moving on to slide number 31. So here again the initial treatment would be a medical management. So the concept that we need to understand is, even if the patient presents with nodules or even cords, but if there is no contractures in the hand or in the finger, then it is not an indication for surgery. We know that this is a progressive condition, but many patients it may just remain at the stage of nodules and cords and may not progress. Any surgical intervention can actually worsen the condition. So it is like it's a wait and watch policy, and the patient should be under periodic examination by the physician to see whether things are worsening. And initially what we do is we try to give intralesional injection of long acting steroids. So in some patients we have definitely seen that there is shrinking of the nodules. Moving to slide number 32, I've put the indications for surgical treatment. So firstly I mentioned that only if the cords and nodules are causing a contracture or are causing a limitation of the finger movements, that is when we will have to go in and do a surgical release. The other thing is we also have to wait for the disease to be mature. So this mature word I've highlighted because it's a very vague terminology. There is nothing structural in the disease or in the lesion that tells that it is mature. But having known the history of the patient and having known that the patient is having these nodes and cords since many years, and the fact that these nodes and cords are now causing contracture of the finger, it probably suggests that the lesion is mature. Because in an immature lesion or very early in the process, surgical trauma itself is going to accelerate the condition. So just because we find a small nodule or a cord, we cannot go in and just excise it off, because that can set up a chain reaction which can lead to formation of nodules and cords in the same finger or in the other fingers. Moving on to slide number 33. So these are the surgical treatment methods. So we have something called a selective fasciectomy if only one or two fingers are involved. But if the entire hand is involved, we'll have to go for a complete fasciectomy. Sometimes surgeons prefer a prophylactic complete fasciectomy. That is, they want to remove the entire deep palmar fascia because they are worried that if one finger has got a Dupuytren's contracture, it can eventually go to all the other fingers. After doing a fasciectomy, typically the skin of the palm is raw and we may require a skin graft. Sometimes in extreme cases we may even require a flap coverage. Sometimes the best option for a rebotrans contracture, especially if it's involving just one finger, is to remove the finger. But again here we will not remove only the finger, we will have to remove the finger along with its metacarpal. So that would be called a ray amputation, and that's quite a rewarding surgery, but provided the lesion is only there in one finger. And some surgeons prefer a surgery called arthrodesis or fusion of the metacarpophalangeal joint. So as you can understand that once a fusion of a finger is done, the finger will lose its functionality. However, some surgeons believe that if you can fuse the finger early or in the early on condition, or in the early stages when the patient is slowly progressively having a lesion or having a contracture, then this can prevent the finger from going into severe kind of contracture where the finger comes and occupies the palm. Because once the finger comes into the palm and occupies the palm, then the entire palm itself becomes functionless. So it's rather better to have a finger that is functionless by fusing it at the metacarpophalangeal joint than having the entire palm and or entire hand as functionless. Having mentioned these surgeries, I must also admit that most of these surgeries are not very rewarding, and there is also an association of varying degree of relapse. So it's not very rewarding surgeries. Moving on to slide number 34. So what is a mallet finger? Basically, it's a flexion deformity of the distal interphalangeal joint of the finger due to a tear or insufficiency of the extensor mechanism of the distal interphalangeal joint. So the extensors of the distal interphalangeal joint, that is the extensor digitorum tendon, is either torn or is avulsed out along with a piece of bone from the distal phalanx. So basically the finger looks like a hammer or a mallet, and therefore it is called a mallet finger. So the most common cause of mallet finger is trauma. Sometimes you can also have a secondary mallet finger in inflammatory conditions of the distal interphalangeal joint. That is, the inflammation and the synovitis in the joint can lead to secondary rupture of the tendon because of the effect of the inflammatory mediators on the tendon. Moving on to slide number 35. Before we move on to the discussion on mallet finger, so here is a picture with all the three classic deformities in the finger, and these are also, as you know, favorite questions for your theory exam. So mallet finger we have already discussed. It's a flexion of the distal interphalangeal joint. Now coming to boutonniere deformity or buttonhole deformity. So in a buttonhole deformity, you have a flexion of the proximal interphalangeal joint and a hyperextension or an extension or a hyperextension of the distal interphalangeal joint. So basically it looks like a buttonhole. In a swan neck deformity, you have just the opposite. You have a hyperextension of the proximal interphalangeal joint and a flexion of the distal interphalangeal joint. That is a swan neck deformity. Moving on to slide number 36. Most people with a mallet finger can have basically almost absolutely normal function. To just highlight something that I noticed, my father used to work in or had his own industrial business. So he used to work a lot with industrial tools. And at some stage, I realized that he had 4 mallet fingers. So when I asked him like from when this happened, so he said like no, I've been having it since many years, probably from my childhood. But his function of his hand was so good that it was barely noticeable. Only when I became an orthopedic PG, probably that's the time that I noticed, and I just asked him. As I've put in slide number 36, the concern with a mallet finger would be the fact that sometimes some patients with a mallet finger can have a secondary swan neck deformity. And a swan neck deformity, now you should understand, it's also involving the proximal interphalangeal joint. And this can cause some amount of limitations. And why does this swan neck deformity occur? So basically what we need to understand is we have the extensors of the proximal interphalangeal joint and the distal interphalangeal joint. So the central band of the extensor, now this extensor actually breaks up into 3 bands. One be a central band that goes and gets itself attached to the middle phalanx. So the basic function of the central band is to cause extension of the proximal interphalangeal joint by pulling on the middle phalanx. However, we also have two lateral slips of this extensor tendon. These lateral slips, as they pass distally, once again converge and they go and get attached to the distal interphalangeal joint. So the function of the lateral slips is basically to cause extension of the distal interphalangeal joint. Now when we have a mallet finger, we have the tear of these lateral slips that is causing a mallet finger. When the lateral slips are not working, now there is an overpull of the central slip of the extensor digitorum, and this central band overpulling or the central slip overpulling causes hyperextension of the proximal interphalangeal joint and thereby a swan neck deformity. So this is the main concern in mallet finger. So the treatment aimed at mallet finger is to prevent a formation of a secondary swan neck deformity. So how do you do that? Moving on to slide number 37, a simple contraption which is called the DIP joint extension splinting. A simple removable cap-like structure is all that we need for treatment of a mallet finger. However, this splint has to be, it's a removable splint, no doubt, but even when we remove to wash the hands or cleanse the hands, we still have to be careful to ensure that the finger is kept as extended as possible. How does this finger splint work? This splint just keeps the joint in the right position or in extension, and by doing that it helps in healing of the torn tendon, and more than that it helps in healing of the torn soft tissues around the tendon. And if there is an avulsion fracture, it also helps in healing of the avulsion fracture. The problem is these avulsion fractures and these torn tendons, they require a long period of 6 to 8 weeks. So we need a patient who is really compliant to be able to use this. Otherwise, the treatment will not work. When people come back for follow-up, by just looking at their finger itself, as doctors, we can tell how compliant they have been in wearing of the splint. There are lots and lots of fancy surgeries that have been described for the treatment of mallet finger. But what we need to understand is any condition which has got a lot of surgeries shows that the condition is not amenable, or the results of those surgical treatments are not very great. So in the last week of February, I had a chance to visit Manipal for a hand injury conference, and there we had the person from or the head of hand department from the Mayo Clinic, and his name is Dr. Mario Russo, and he is the foremost expert in hand injuries in the world. And what he was telling was that this simple wearing of the splint would be the best treatment for mallet finger. He himself has probably described 3 or 4 surgeries, but he was telling that each and every one of those surgeries is only second class treatment. The first class treatment for a mallet finger is to give a splint and to make the patient understand that the patient has to be compliant, and the treatment would be for 6 to 8 weeks. Moving on to slide number 38. So I have put one of those fancy surgeries that are available for mallet finger. As you can see in this picture, there is a Kirschner wire going through the through the distal phalanx into the middle phalanx, so that is blocking any more extension or flexion, and the avulsion is treated with a pull-through wire. So most important thing is this is a second class treatment or a second class surgery. Why this is a second class surgery is any surgery done at this level is going to cause extreme amount of stiffness. So I would also want to do this surgery only in a patient who is going for a swan neck deformity. And why the patient is going for swan neck deformity is because the patient was non-compliant with the splint which was initially prescribed to the patient. It's as simple as that. Moving on to slide number 39, we have a condition called trigger finger. So before understanding what is trigger finger, we will move on to slide number 40. So basically in slide number 40, we have this picture with of a single finger that is put up here, and you'll notice something marked A1, A2, A3, A4 and A5, and all of these are called pulleys. A1, A2, A3, A4 and A5. And if you carefully notice, the A1 pulley is at the level of the metacarpophalangeal joint. A2 pulley is at the level of the proximal phalanx. A3 pulley is at the level of the proximal interphalangeal joint. A4 pulley is at the middle phalanx, and the A5 pulley is at the level of the distal interphalangeal joint. So these pulleys, what are they doing there? These pulleys are increasing the efficiency of the flexor tendon. The first question is, why do we need to increase the efficiency? When you come to the finger, you notice that of a single tendon attached to a muscle belly is now having to work across 3 different joints in a very quick span of time or in short distances. So within short distances, it has to work across 3 different joints, the same tendon. So that means the tendon has to be extremely efficient and its position has to be carefully secured in place. And this securing of the tendon in place is done by the pulleys. If you move to slide number 41, so here there are 2 diagrams. In the diagram on top, it shows how having an intact pulley increases the efficiency at each joint. So because the pulley is intact, it is restraining the tendon in place, and by restraining the tendon in place, we are getting maximum function across each joint. Now if you go to the slide figure in figure B, in slide number 41, you will notice that one of the pulleys is broken, and when the pulley is broken, the tendon tends to bowstring. So bowstringing is not a problem, but it reduces the efficiency of the pulley. So this is the reason why we have such intricate mechanism in each of the fingers with the help of the pulleys. Now when we come back to slide number 39, that is to define a trigger finger, basically what we are having is we are having a thickening or an inflammation in the A1 pulley. That's it. So the student has to remember that there is an inflammation or a tenosynovitis or an inflammation of the tendon sheath, and this is occurring at the A1 pulley. And after having this inflammation for a few days or for a few months, over a period of time, any inflammation will lead to healing of the inflammation by scarring. So similarly, here the A1 pulley starts scarring, and when the A1 pulley starts scarring, what's passing underneath? The tendon is passing underneath. So the free gliding of the tendon is limited now, and therefore the patient feels a little difficulty in flexion of that finger, and after flexing, when he's trying to extend, he'll not be able to extend his finger in a smooth manner. So this causes a triggering like effect, and that is called a trigger finger. A trigger finger in the initial stages does not require any treatment. However, over a period of time, it can either remain in the same way or it can progress. If it is progressing, it can also become painful, in which case our job would be to help release the A1 pulley. So now we understood that the pulleys are helping in increasing efficiency. So that is there. But the surgery for this condition would be release of the A1 pulley. So the efficiency of the tendon is being lost in the surgery, but the triggering itself causing disturbance in the finger movements is going to disappear by doing the release, and therefore it's a kind of a bargain that we have to make with nature. Moving on to slide number 42. So here I have put the treatment. The first line of treatment would be medical management using some modalities, physiotherapy modalities, to reduce the inflammation. Sometimes what happens, patients come to us with an acute trigger finger. Usually there is an inflammation, underlying inflammation of the A1 pulley. If there is an inflammation of the A1 pulley, it should resolve with anti-inflammatory medications and anti-inflammatory physiotherapy, in which case the triggering can reduce or may even disappear after treatment. So we would try a little bit of medical management. Here I have put a point called steroid injection. Personally, I am not very fond of putting steroid injections into the A1 pulley. First things first, the steroid injection is going to be a long-acting steroid, and it's a kind of a blind procedure. With experience, we can direct the steroid into the pulley. The only problem is, even if there is a little bit of a spillover of the steroid into the tendon substance, then that can lead to spontaneous rupture of the tendon, not on the same day but in the succeeding days. So the worry here is that in our effort to help the patient by giving a steroid injection into the pulley, we may end up causing a spontaneous rupture of the flexor tendon. And if you compare the treatment between a surgical release of an A1 pulley versus the treatment of a spontaneous rupture of a flexor tendon, it is 100 times, not 100%, 100 times more difficult to treat a spontaneous rupture of a flexor tendon as compared to doing a simple surgical release of the A1 pulley. So in carpal tunnel syndrome, I was emphasizing that I would try my best to avoid surgery for the patient. But when a patient comes with a trigger and after anti-inflammatory medications and physiotherapy fails, I would be more happy to do a simple 10-minute surgery to release the A1 pulley and thereby instantly relieve the patient. And this, I personally believe, is safer than taking the patient through a steroid injection. Moving on to slide number 43. So we will do de Quervain's tenosynovitis. Now going back to the trigger finger, I used a word called stenosing tenosynovitis. So all these tendons have got a sheath through which it is passing, and that sheath was inflamed. So that was tenosynovitis, and over a period of time the sheath has now contracted, or the tunnel through which the tendon is passing has contracted, and that causes a stenosing effect. Similarly, de Quervain's tenosynovitis is also a stenosing effect of the sheath of the first dorsal compartment through which the extensor pollicis brevis and the abductor pollicis longus, both these tendons are passing. So again there is a chronic inflammation of these tendons, and over a period of time this inflamed sheath can cause difficulty in movement of the tendon. This is very common these days, especially with the use of the mobile phones. Clinically, the patient is going to present with pain and tenderness just lateral to the radial styloid process at the area of the sheath. A simple diagnostic test, as in slide number 44, would be a Finkelstein's test, where we grab the thumb and we ulnar deviate the hand. This is going to cause a passive stretching of the tendon, and this passive stretching of the tendon is going to be painful for the patient. So it's a simple clinical diagnosis. Of course, after doing that, we will run the patient through an ultrasound to confirm the condition, and then we will take the patient up for a release, or initially we will put the patient on anti-inflammatory drugs, and if the patient is not doing well with anti-inflammatory drugs and with anti-inflammatory physiotherapy modalities, then we will go for a release of the tendon sheath. My comments for steroid injection would be very similar to the one that I mentioned for the trigger finger, because again here, if my steroid injection gets into the tendon, that can cause a spontaneous rupture of the tendon, and a spontaneous rupture of the tendons that are going for the thumb is going to be very bad for the patient, because the thumb function is going to be severely affected. So we don't want that. However, theoretically for your exams you can put steroid injection as a modality of treatment. Moving on to slide number 46, the last condition would be a ganglion. So a ganglion is a simple cyst that is either arising from the sheath of the tendon, the synovial sheath of the tendon, or it is also arising from a joint. So it could be an intra-articular ganglion or an extra-articular ganglion. The characteristic thing about a ganglion is its mobility. So when you put the finger into motion, the ganglion, you can see, will move proximally and distally. It is mostly located on the dorsum of the wrist. Sometimes it may be seen on the volar side also. Moving on to slide number 47, we can just leave a ganglion alone. We don't need to do any treatment. Some people do repeated aspiration of the ganglion. You can aspirate the ganglion, but within a few days or a few weeks, it will refill once again. The only complete management for a ganglion would be an excision. So what we do is, like, we always tell the patient that the size of the ganglion is what matters. If it's an extremely big ganglion and the patient is embarrassed about the ganglion, then we can go for a surgery. However, the problem is, because most of these ganglions are on the dorsum of the hand, it can lead to a scar which is easily visible as the patient stretches out their hand. So we counsel the patient regarding the scar concerns, and accordingly we manage the patient. So an interesting fact is, like in the olden days, it is also called a Bible cyst, simply because the most houses had a Bible, and in those days the Bible was a big book. What the parents or the priest would do is bang the ganglion with a Bible, and it would rupture inside itself, and that would be curative. So there is a lot of religion and faith involved, and the patient is cured. So that brings me to the end of the class, and so the topic was regional conditions of the wrist and the hand. As always, I want to emphasize that if there are any doubts, queries, you can always bring it back to me through your class rep, and I'll be happy to do another session to clear your doubts. Thank you.